Alright, so back again for another Let's Build a Spaceship video. This one is actually the first that isn't directly based off what I put into the presentation that you can go and watch elsewhere on the channel. Um, and the topic that made the most sense to me to cover here, to cover in this first one outside of the presentation, is warp travel. Because, well, generally speaking, in science fiction, I'd say that you've got warp, hyperspace, and wormholes for the ways that you travel faster than the speed of light across a galaxy, or across space in general. And of those three, I actually prefer warp. I think it's the easiest to explain, is the most reasonable. And there's a part of me that would like to do a video, at least for wormholes. I may do one or may combine them for the other two, just talking about my opinions on those, why I chose not to use them, and things like that. But for this, yeah, I want to talk about warp. And yes, I have something in my hand that kind of helps. So yeah, so for me, it's warp in that it's just I'm doing something like there's a part of a spaceship, and yes, I'm gonna have things to show over there. Oh, I almost forgot. This is, let me pull it up. NGC 2841 Spiral Galaxy. Really neat picture too. But sorry, a little bit lost track of my mind. I prefer warp because it's easy enough to explain, I think, or easier to explain than with the. It's easier to explain the idea that within space we're just causing something to happen in this volume here that lets us do things that are normally impossible, such as traveling faster than the speed of light. Now, the way I do this is I say that, okay, within this space, I'm just increasing the speed of light. I mean, why not? Because there is the idea with, okay, the reason why you can't break the speed of light is relativity tells us through the Lorentz Fitzgerald, there's a third guy who's credited, I can never remember his name, through those transformations, we get that as you approach the speed of light, you see dilation effects, such as lengths increasing or decreasing. Pretty sure it's decreasing also the time dilation stuff, so traveling at relativistic speeds, which is the point I'm going to get to, when you're traveling at relativistic speeds, you perceive time passing slower than everyone around you who's traveling slower at non-relativistic speed. And the border, the line between, okay, here's relativistic, here's non-relativistic, is 1/2 the speed of light. So if we push the speed of light out there, we're also pushing up that 1/2, since that's the value that would be used for these transformations. So you'd be pushing that up. So if we were to get a warp field that gives us the speed of light is now at, say, 10 times the speed of light, then relativistic speeds, relativistic effects, would come into play at 1/2 the speed of light. 5 times the speed of light instead of 1/2 the speed of light, because it's half of the new speed of light. That's the idea. There was another thought. Oh yeah, also there's the whole, as you approach the speed of light, the amount of energy required to continue actually grows exponentially. And that's another thing that's relativistic versus non-relativistic. Non-relativistic is basically, to go faster, you have to increase by a linear amount. But once you hit relativistic, now it becomes now becomes exponential and goes like that up and towards infinity. So yeah, that's my explanation in there for how it works, but there is more to it than that. I do try to have more involved with my stuff than that, with my science fiction than that, and that's also what I want to talk about here, because if we, oh no, it won't work. Okay, I don't have that file there. Well, here, let me see if well, no, just go with it. The rules for science fiction, the whole, you maintain the laws of physics, to use that as an example, you can bend them, or you can break them, but then you need to heal them. This is part of the whole breaking and healing, what I'm about to get to, which is the actual structure, the shape of these warp fields. And because they are relevant, there are certain repercussions from using this style of travel versus others. And so to start, here is a graph, yeah, I need to look that way, for basically just a normal round kind of wave. Yes, I'm only doing one part of it, and basically this should be the intensity of the warp field as you go away from the ship. So the the very center of this, so we've got the blue there that's meant to stand in place for intensity visually, not just the height of the distribution. But the very center and along the baseline, that's where the ship would be. And if you're just producing a normal field, like an electromagnetic field, I know the actual math wouldn't work out for this specific shape, but the drop-off of energy is nonlinear across that. And this would lead to a problem, because you're changing the speed of light. You kind of don't want, like, to use my arm as the example, you don't want a high speed of light here and a low speed of light here. That's going to be very weird and could lead to problems. So this shape you would want to avoid, because either you would need to have either you need to somehow compensate for high and low, or you need to make this thing so big that basically where it's solid blue in there, that's the ship completely fits in that. So you need a huge field to make that viable. That means a lot of energy, not ideal. So instead, what would be better is if you could have a square wave kind of shape, where it's just, are you in normal space or are you in this warped space? And it's just yes or no. And if you're in it, then it's consistently that. So, like, the top of the wave is completely flat. The top of this distribution is completely flat. That would be ideal. And I actually I don't remember which story it is, but in one of the two Catherine verses that I've got so far, I Call My Ship Catherine or A Letter from Catherine, I do have the main character talk about how the thing that's actually really impressive about warp fields is not the warp field. It's this. It's figuring out how to actually produce essentially a square wave for the distribution of the field's intensity. That you have this entire wide space that's basically all the same thing, as opposed to it being like this. Now, realistically, though, this would never be achieved. You would not have a perfectly hard, straight up and down edge like that. It's not going to be a thing. Instead, you have something more like this, where it does turn in some, but it's still, it's a narrow space there. So there's plenty of place where it is flat up top. The intensity is constant across. So it would be like, high, low, starting to increase high. So it's only here that there's a problem, right? But all the rest of it is constant. So that's still very desirable. It's not ideal. Square wave, this thing would be ideal, but ideal is not achievable. It's just how it is. Nope. Wrong button. There we go. Nope. There. Now this does lead to some issues, though, because, okay, well, what would happen, going back to use my hand, what would happen if you have something that actually does cross this interface? Because, like, here, okay, everything is constant, but here is where you have the interface going from this low speed of light to high speed of light. Normal space, warped space. What happens? So there's an effect called, there's a phenomenon called Cherenkov radiation. It's basically an optical boom. It is analogous to sonic booms, where you have a particle traveling faster than the speed of light. It's worth noting that it's actually completely possible. The whole universal constant thing, that is the speed of light in a vacuum. And that is the speed you can't go faster than. But speed of light not in a vacuum is lower. So you can have an instance where, because light comes into a medium, it is now slowed down, but you could have a particle like a neutrino, I know that research is done, but also cosmic rays that are, in some cases, like entire atomic nucleuses. It's like they're much heavier, much larger, and traveling really, really fast, that will enter the medium, and because they're traveling faster than the speed of light in the medium, they undergo Cherenkov radiation, where they're basically just releasing light. And it is, I'm pretty sure it's like that's how it releases the energy, so it slows down to below the current speed of light, the speed of light in the medium. Cherenkov, I don't remember his first name. He first described it as happening with nuclear reactors because of radiation being released by the fissile material entering the water, and this is true. There will be a bluish-green glow because of the Cherenkov radiation of the radiation entering the water, because the speed of light is slower in water. but it's also observed in the upper atmosphere. That's where you've got cosmic rays striking the atmosphere, and hey, it's the atmosphere. It is a medium. Light is slower. These things are really fast. Enter, and now they undergo Cherenkov radiation to slow down. And by the way, just as an aside, because some people, when the Large Hadron Collider was being turned on at CERN, were like, "Oh no, we're going to cause a black hole." Blah. It's like no. Large Hadron Collider, and I don't even think that they are planning the next generation collider already. Not even that one. I mean, we have no idea how we will get to the energy levels of those cosmic rays hitting the atmosphere. There is way more intense particle physics going on in the upper atmosphere from cosmic rays hitting the atmosphere than anything CERN will ever achieve, probably. I mean, it will be quite a while before we get there. So, yeah, it's just, you really don't need to worry about the whole spontaneously forming a black hole by these collisions. Those collisions happen naturally all the time, and it hasn't happened yet, so we're fine. So in my fiction, though, with this Cherenkov radiation, I crank it up because we're not talking about just a single particle. We're talking about, like, entire part of a ship, or, just because I was using my arm as the placing, it's like the whole thing here, which there's a lot of particles here. So this all were traveling faster than the speed of light and suddenly went outside of that interface. So now it's in normal space and it's traveling way faster than the speed of light in dark space. Or whatever that, well, I should continue to use the term normal space because we're not changing the speed of light there. This would want to undergo Cherenkov radiation, especially if there is some medium there. I don't know if it would happen in a vacuum. I'm pretty sure it is. You actually have to have some medium there for there to be an interaction between light and the mass for it to be like, hey, you're traveling too fast. Okay, I'll slow down. It's like you do kind of need something like that. It's been a while since I've done that research, but I'm pretty sure that was part of it. That Cherenkov radiation does involve the very fast particle actually passing through the medium. So anyway, if that happens, though, there's a lot of particles here, a lot of energy. So what I describe in the stories is that it will undergo what's called a Cherenkov burn. That's my term for it. In that it does undergo the radiation. There's Cherenkov radiation, but there's so much, because there's so much energy, it's ionizing radiation and just burns it all away. So it disintegrates. Not good for a ship. So you need some way of monitoring the shape of the field. So you need to know if suddenly it starts collapsing. Because if it does, you need to hit the brakes immediately. In fact, I do have that happen in A Letter from Catherine, where the brakes are hit immediately in order to protect the ship and everyone on it. Okay, well, how are you going to track this? Track this field? Because in theory, you don't want to just trust, hey, I'm feeding enough energy, something weird could happen. In the beginning of a ship, I call my ship Catherine, it actually, there is a possibility of, like, you just come across mass, dust in space that suddenly enters an exit, and it undergoes a Cherenkov burn because it got accelerated doing all this. But when that happens, I describe that you actually see the warp field try to adapt so that it maintains consistency, but you end up seeing things warp because on the ship, because suddenly the speed of light is changing. So there are some weird things that can happen there, and you don't want to just be like, oh yeah, I'm feeding enough power. No. You need to actually observe the field directly. Well, how do you do that? Oh, okay, let's think about this. It is something that is changing the speed of light. Like this. Not exactly like this, but this is, well, it's not perfect for what I'm referencing here. This is a tank prism, so it's actually not so much used for separating light, but into separating light into different frequencies. You would actually use two of these to make a periscope, and I do have a second. I just only grabbed one. But it is still, why does light split in a prism? Because of refraction. When light enters, it will travel at a different speed. It will slow down. But the specific amount that slows down actually varies with the frequency. So you can use, but it is an analogous situation. It is essentially refraction that would be happening with light passing through the warp field. So I have something like this here. And I'm not saying that this is accurate. I'm just giving a general idea. Like, potentially the angles would be going the other way. I'm not sure. I just needed a graphic, okay? Forgive me if it's not completely right. But it is still, you basically do have an interface not totally dissimilar to a lens. It would be lensing things and bending the light. So in theory, then, you could watch for the light from various stars to see, okay, how does it move as it enters the warp field? And from that, figure out, okay, what is the distance out of the warp field? What is the thickness of the warp field? What is the intensity of the warp field? You would be able to figure that all out by just monitoring this stuff. But it's that's very, very involved. I mean, it's basically, hey, we know this exists out there, but we don't know its size. We don't know its exact placement. We don't know the material it's made out of. Like how much it's going to refract the light, how far away it is, and how thick it is. We don't know any of that. We're just going to make observations, run all the math, and try to figure it out. That's involved. That's complex. That's going to be hard for somebody to maintain. I mean, it's like the very thing about your car. There's various systems on your car you're not going to be able, you can't maintain. Some of that's by design. Some of it is because it's just really complex. But most people, you can still change a battery, change oil. You can do that. Well, you can change tires. But if you're traveling in dark space, where you're light years away from AAA or just other auto club kind of stuff, what are you gonna do when you got trouble? Yeah, you kind of want to have it be something that you can that the user, the pilot, can understand and can work with. And I'm pretty sure it's in I Call My Ship Catherine. I described one pilot who he came up with an alternative solution. I realized I didn't make a graphic for this, but that's fine. I don't need it. Is instead of coming up with using these cameras and complex computer systems in order to track the position of stars and see how they change, instead of doing that, he did this. He just put spikes on the outside of his ship. Faceable. It's actually really genius as well. And it's kind of funny. Part of the reason why I did this was to make fun of myself, even thinking about doing this really complex thing with these lens, analogous to a lens, doing all that. No, I'm making fun of myself because it's like, I mean, if we just have something, small, thin, that sticks out really far from the ship, if the tip of this burns, undergoes a Cherenkov burn, it's like, oh, okay, we saw that happen. We need to fix that. Because there's going to be so little mass there that's not going to endanger the ship, is the idea. And these are called Cherenkov probes. Because, they can burn away. I mean, ideally, you would have them still within the field. You don't have them right up against the edge. You don't want them like that. You want them like this. But if the field ever comes down that far, this much burning away is not an issue. It's not going to it's not going to damage anything. And chances are it would only come down to about that far, and then it's like, oh, okay, increase the power, extend the probe a little bit further, correct for that. And it's like, that's what you would do, because that's reasonable. A complete failure is very unlikely. Could happen, but it's also, if that happens, you're basically going to die anyway, so. The probe wouldn't have helped, neither would the cameras. The more advanced camera system. So, yeah, I'm just trying I think that's kind of it. Is that if you read the books, I do go a lot more into the dangers. Yeah, I can turn this off. Into the dangers of Cherenkov burns, where it describes certain things happening. I don't feel a need to go into that here. The videos, I want to try to keep these short. I'm probably going to fail epically, but still, I like to talk. But yeah, that is kind of just how the warp fields work. And going back to the whole thing about, breaking the laws of physics and healing them, this whole thing about, okay, what is the, I'm not going to move myself back, but what is the shape of the field? Well, it's like square wave, well, it would actually be like this because nothing would be ideal. And then how do you monitor it? That's all part of that healing that I talk about, in that it's like, yeah, I broke the law of physics, but okay, well, what are the repercussions of this? How do we interact with this? How does this work? How do we make it safe? Can it ever be safe? Things like that is part of the healing. And I do consider that worth exploring. And that's what I want to talk about. Part of the reason why the fiction method exists is to talk about that aspect of science fiction. So, I guess one other thing I can mention for closing this one off is the actual mechanical, physical designs of the warp field emitters. There are different ones. And I do describe in a letter from Catherine two different ones. One where it's just a single thing that would be very large. I'm putting my hands like it, but a single thing that's in the ship, probably pretty central, so that the field it produces evenly covers the entire ship. You don't want it to one side because then you need a lot of power to reach out to the other side. Like using my arm again, you want it centered here because if you put it here, you have to expend a lot of power to have a field reach out over to here. But if you are here, then it same amount of power to cover both. It's efficiency. So there's that design. The other that's actually what is used on the main ships that I use in the Catherineverse, thus far at least. They actually use much smaller ones. That would be more like the size of a thermos, is how I mentally figured it. I don't remember if I specifically described it, but it is something you can grab with one hand. But you use a lot of them. So the ship is long and has like a central spine, and they're along that. So they all contribute together to the field. So to use this as an example, you just have them up against each other the entire length. So the ship can be very long, but produce a consistent field all the way down, and then it would close off at the end. Yeah, that's that design there. I don't really know if there would be other designs that I would use, but it also gives you this design where you got a whole bunch, gives you redundancy, because if one fails, well, the other two on either side should be covering it. And it's also, you can pull it out, put a new one in. So yeah, I definitely had some fun thinking through all that, and hopefully if you ever read it, you'll find it fun and interesting. But yeah, so that's just the basic ideas to how my warp systems work in the Catherineverse. Yeah, not sure what video I will do next, but well, we'll find out together. See you then.